we're going to be talking about automating the employee onboarding process using Microsoft 365 and the Power Platform. My name is Becky Bertram. I own a company called Savvy Technical Solutions, and I am up the road, so to speak, in the St. Louis area. I do live on the Illinois side of the river, so I guess we're one state away from you, but we jaunt on over to Kansas City on a somewhat regular basis. I've been an MVP since 2009, and so I've been around. If you've been around a while, let's connect. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer as well, and a mother of 3, so my hobbies are doing dishes and laundry. That's pretty much it. If you want to reach out to me, you can reach me on Twitter at Becky Bertram, or on my website, there's a submit question kind of thing. So yeah, feel free to reach out if you have questions afterwards. I'm always happy to connect with folks. And one of the things I hope we can get out of today is that you guys also can share experiences with each other. So again, I kind of want to make this interactive. I know we only have an hour of time, and there is a lot of content, so that may, we'll see how far we get. But this is not just about me talking, but this is me giving an example of how we're solving a problem. But I would be very curious how other people have used similar approaches or very different approaches to solve the same problem. So please feel free to speak up. There we go. Okay. So the purpose of this presentation, as I said, was just to provide an example of using building blocks and to jog your imagination. So what it is not is this is not a how-to. This is not a developer, how to create a Power App, how to create a flow. That's not what this is about. So what I wanted to just give you an example of an end-to-end solution. And in this solution, we will be talking about how we can use, we'll go through it, Teams, Yammer, Planner, Azure Active Directory, Search, Microsoft Answers, just a whole bunch of things together that create it's like taking all those building blocks and building your little castle out of it. So that's the idea. And again, I think a lot of us work with Office 365 or Microsoft 365, and but sometimes it's hard to think about how you can sort of daisy chain things all together. So that's sort of the purpose of this presentation. So if we talk about this scenario here, let me lay out sort of what the scenario is. And this is a solution. This is based on a solution that I built for one of my clients. Clearly, because it has to do with human resources, I was not able to launch it in terms of, sorry, I couldn't show you the actual solution because it has proprietary data. So during this scenario, what I've done is I built sort of a quick and dirty version of it, a very summary dirty version of it. So you're not going to see error handling and things like that in there that I would do in a production environment, but it's more just to show you how you can connect those different pieces together. And again, this is based on a real solution though, so I can talk through some of the things that we did in that actual solution. So if we look at the scenario setup here, the idea is that for human resources, candidates are going to go through a screening and hiring process before they become an employee. So the issue is you have employees that they're not employees yet. Right now, they've just given a verbal agreement that, yeah, I'm interested in working for your company, perhaps. Once they become an employee, then they need an account, they need licensing, they need an account in Azure AD, and then additionally the IT department wants to be notified because they have a checklist, and then additionally various stakeholders need to be notified that this person is starting, their first day is this day, that kind of thing. When we talk about the different workloads involved, we're going to be going over SharePoint Online, Planner, Power Apps, Power Automate, Azure AD, Exchange, Teams, Yammer, Office Online, and Search. So we're going to be taking all these different workloads and showing how this solution can be utilized across workloads to make sort of a unified solution. So if we look at the background, sort of what we're dealing with here is the fact that oftentimes when you're dealing with human resources data, you oftentimes have a platform that's not SharePoint. You usually have sort of an HR specific platform. However, in the case of this client, they still wanted to be able to have a list of employees within SharePoint. So in other words, the HR system is going to keep track of actual payroll information, actual like personal PII and things like that. But the SharePoint list is really more a place where the firm could sort of eyeball like who's here. And it actually kept track of people that had the SharePoint site had been around for like 10 years. So this was actually a way where they could keep track of how many people were active versus inactive, whereas the HR system may just keep track of active employees, that kind of thing. So there was an actual purpose to be able to go and sort of see the list of employees within SharePoint. So even though SharePoint is not the system of record, there is still a use for it. Additional Azure AD, in this case, is used for identity management. In the scenario I had with this organization, they actually had on-premises AD. So I actually went so far as I had Power Automate call a power or a function in Azure, an Azure function, and the Azure function used PowerShell remoting to remote into the Active Directory server and create user accounts. So definitely extra layer there. If you can eliminate that, it's a whole lot easier because you can just use the Azure AD action, which we're going to use in our flow here. But if we look at the scenario here too, the assumption is that each department has a team. And that if a person is hired on and they're added to the IT team or the marketing team, they should be dropped in the actual Office 365 group for that team so that they can be part of the actual Teams team, right? So that's sort of the scenario here in terms of technology. In terms of business requirements, the idea is that recruiters, as they're, or HR professionals, as they're moving someone through the hiring process, they want to be able to have a way of task tracking. My client used Asana, and I said, you know what, that was a great checklist tool, but I said, you've got Planner, why not use Planner? So we're using Planner, and again, when I built the system, we were using sort of the a sticky note version of it, the cards. But now, obviously, Planner tasks can also be surfaced in your tasks by Planner and To Do. If you're in the Teams environment, you can view it just as a simple checklist as well. So, but the key was that you would have task tracking to know, I've got this candidate, I need to do their, background checks or drug testing or whatever it is that you need to do. I need to send out the contract, blah, blah, blah. Another requirement is when we started this process, when I looked at the original employees list, they were keeping track of a lot of information that I would say was disposable. And what I mean is, like when they first hired, they would give them a free, this company would give them a free shirt. Right, so there was actually keeping track of what's your t-shirt size, and we're going to set them up with monitors. So how many monitors do you need? Well, the truth is this information was necessary when the employee was first onboarded, but after that, it was not really needed to be retained anymore.
Like a
Once the
t-shirt
IT
set,
department,
that's probably going to change, right?
yeah, depending on how many donuts they give out in the break room,
That's
right?
right.
Or how stressful it is, how much weight you lose. I don't know. Um, but there was also things like, did we give them a parking transponder? Well, the parking transponder, once you're giving it to them, well, the building property manager, security team kept track of that, right? Like the security guards or whatever, that was theirs. So it had to be checked off that it was done. But once it was done, it was no longer the company's job to keep track of what your transponder number was for the parking garage, or things like that, where it was just information that's like, as you're collecting information, you need it. But once the monitors have been issued, the IT department's keeping track of that in their asset management library, or asset management system. So it needed to be there for the initial setup, but it didn't need to be persisted, right? Because once you have data that you're collecting and persistent, and then it becomes bad data. I'd rather have no data than old bad data, and it was just taking up room. So the idea is we wanted to have sort of a temporary list of data and then this persistent employee list. The last thing is being able to make sure that, the proper people are notified. So in this case, finance department had to set up their paperwork. Their manager had to know that a new person and schedule a meet and greet. And there's a number of people that just had to be marketing, has to know, to give them their swag or whatever. So a number of people had to be notified. So the idea is that once this person, before they come on board, not the day of, but in advance, we need to be able to say this person is coming. So this is the system that we came up with. So what we're going to do is we're going to create, and this is what I'm going to sort of demonstrate to you, this sort of lightweight minima version of the sort of full body thing I created. There's a SharePoint list that's a new hire list. So this is a way that's that temporary spot. So for instance, when you have a candidate and you come in, you probably know their first and last name, but when you're interviewing them for a job, you may not have collected their birth date yet. You may still be in the, hey, are you interested in, this is what our company is about stage. You may not know their home address and everything like that first, right? So the new hire list becomes this sort of scratch place to keep track of information. Another thing is if you have this third-party HR system and you go create an account, they had a number, not just HR, they had another system for hoteling software and another system for keeping track of their sort of family tree, their org chart and stuff like that. So this is a place where when you've gone and in your checklist, you've created this person in these different systems, you can say this is the link to their profile in this system, or this is their user ID in that system, or whatever. Again, sort of this temporary spot. So what happens is we have a separate list of planner tasks, and this is actually a SharePoint list. And that SharePoint list keeps track of what's the name of the task, who does it need to be assigned to, are there any supporting documentation like a link to DocuSign or a link to the folder where we keep resumes or whatever. So the SharePoint list kept track of the template. What would happen is when a new item is added to the SharePoint new hire list, a workflow kicks off in Power Automate, a flow that will create a new bucket for that person within Planner. And then it will populate it with the tasks from that task list. Now there is a new Hire Power app, which is going to be it's the form that the HR professionals will use to add information to that new hire list or to edit it or to update it. So that's the mechanism for that data entry. And we're going to be surfacing both the Power App and the plan within the HR team. So, and the back end, they don't really need to know about the planner task list. They only need whoever's editing that template needs to know about it. But really, and even that new hire list itself, they don't really need to get to it because it's being surfaced via the Power App. Like you said before, this is just a great big warning saying, please don't get upset if you don't see proper error handling, variable naming. This is a very, I don't want to say quick and dirty, but this is definitely not. This is in my dev tenant, so just take it with a grain of salt, please. The purpose of this, again, is not for how to build it. I know how to build apps. We could do a whole separate session on the right way to build apps in Power Automate, but that's not what this is. So be gentle. All right, so let's give an example of what this would look like. Okay. All right, so if we go into this new hire list, you can see that this is where we're keeping track of first name, last name, birthday, t-shirt size, department, start date. Here's the HR system ID. Have they been issued a security badge? Do we know their office location, etc. But for the employees, that's where the information is being stored. For the employees, they would actually, we have a channel that's specifically an employee management channel. And this is where they can go into the Power App and they can view the list of new hires. And for each individual new hire, they can view the information for the new hire. They can edit the information, and in fact, they can view the tasks that have been created for that user within Planner. They're not going to be checking off them. I still want them to use Planner or, the task management, task by Planner and to do. I still want them to use that if they are going to be checking off tasks, but within the Power app, it is nice to kind of know how far along on the process are we for this person. So again, the idea here is they don't need to go directly to that list of new hires. I surfaced it up here just so you could see it, but in general, that would be hidden from them. They'd be using this. So I could go in and here is the plan, the actual plan for those folks. So I've got a couple people that I've set up here and you can see what it is. So upload the resume. Here's a link to the candidate information library, accept the verbal offer, send the offer, get the t-shirt size, etc. So if we look at that SharePoint list of the planner tasks, you can see here we've got the name of the task, description, who it's assigned to, the attachment URL, the name of the attachment, and an order column. I actually, in my, what I did for the client is I actually created another column that was a dependency column that said basically we had groups. So essentially each group had a dependency on another item in the list. So essentially, for example, if one of the tasks was perform background check, there's a second task that said communicate results of background check to employee. Well, that would only get provisioned once the perform background check has been completed. So I actually went in and created an extra set of dependencies. Now, one thing to keep in mind of is the fact that if you're doing provisioning tasks within your Power Automate script, if you look at the buckets, it doesn't add them down. It adds them. They're ordered by how recent they are. So if you add it, it's actually going to add it from the bottom up. So that's why it's helpful for them to be sort of in a logical order. So that's why I created this order. And then when we go into the flow, it actually reverses the order when they add them there. So let's go in and give it a try just to see how this really happens. So I'm going to go in and we're going to add in Patrick Mahomes because we're in Kansas City. He's a baby, so he was born yesterday. He's young. He's very talented. I don't mean that sense of a baby. I mean he's young. He's probably extra large because the dude's a big guy. All right, but he is in the defense department, I guess. Now, he would be in offense, I suppose, but I'm going to put him in the IT department because he's one of us. He's going to start on the 29th. And maybe I do have this information, maybe I don't, but I'm going to go ahead and save it. So what's going to happen behind the scenes is our Power Automate flow is going to execute. So it's going to happen when a new item is created in the new hire list. It's going to create a new bucket for that user. What I'm going to do after that is I have to update the new hire list with a bucket ID because that's how the Power Automate or the Power app knows which bucket to fetch to display you the tasks from it. So then it's going to go to the that lists and planner tasks, and then for each list, I'm going to go create a task. Now, you can't create a task with attachments and stuff like that in it. You really can just have the name. You can assign colors to it, all kinds of colors, but a start date, due date, and who it's assigned to. So if you want to, I basically go through and say, did I say there was an attachment in my SharePoint list item? If there was, then we're going to give that attachment name and URL. And along the same lines, if you want to add a description. So I said, is there a description? If there is, then we're going to add that description to the planner task. So this is what gets fired when from flow there. So now that that has happened, that hopefully has had time to execute, we can now see that we have a new bucket for Patrick Mahomes. This is where we can have the link If I wanted to go in here and there's the attachment that got put in here, I can see that's created. I don't know if I have descriptions I don't know if I added descriptions for any of these. I probably should have that since my code is doing the description, but that would put that description in there. That is how we create that sort of temporary list. And again, it went and updated that. So if I go in and I look at his tasks, I can now see those tasks that got added. All right, any questions about that so far? Okay, well then I will keep on going. So many windows. Okay. All right, so now we're going to move on to the second step of the process, which is assuming that this person committed and they said they are going to be hired. Now, this is not necessarily on their start date, but again, once you know what the start date is, like when they've committed and they've said, this is my start date, that's a point in time in which they said, okay, we're ready to make this record official. So what's going to happen at that point is they are going to click a button in the Power App that says copy this to the employees list. That's using that on button click event, like that trigger in the flow, and it's going to copy the record down to the employee list. That in turn is going to fire a flow of the on employee created or modified, and that's going to do a number of things. It's going to create a user in Azure Active Directory. It's going to look at which department they're in and go, the flow is going to add them to the proper Office or Microsoft 365 group that they should be a part of. There is a premium connector where, in this case, the IT department actually said they wanted to create a Word checklist for this person. And I was like, at first I was confused. I was like, why don't we do the whole planner task thing for you guys too? It's so convenient. They said, well, actually, it's not that, there's a due date and assigned a person. We do all the tasks pretty much all at the same time. This is more a mental checklist to make sure we didn't forget anything along the lines of what you had if you had a sticky note stuck to your desk, right? I said, okay, that actually makes sense. I'm not usually a fan of checklists in a Word document, but it makes sense. They said, honestly, if we give this to an intern, we just want to be able to check the intern and say, did you really remember to do everything? So what's going to happen is it's actually going to take the information, it's going to use a Word template, and then it's going to use that, put the employee's name and department and phone number and everything at the top of that and generate that Word template and then dump it in the IT channel. They have an employee management channel as well where they can see the checklist that gets created. Additionally, the IT department, anybody else is going to be notified. And then finally, there is a separate workflow that goes through and says, so at the company I was doing this for, they actually every year on the anniversary of their new hire date, it was saying, congratulate, please wish this person a happy 5th anniversary or whatever, or on their birthday, it would say happy birthday. So what this flow is going to do is it's also going to post a message to this Life Events Yammer group that's going to say, please welcome Becky Bertram, her first day. She'll be joining the company on, January 11th or whatever. So by having that, making them employee, it's going to actually notify everybody, hey, this new person's about to get hired. So that's what this new flow is going to do. The next step that's sort of secondary to this, but it is possible to add a office location when the employee is created, and that office location can actually be tied to the floor plan. And then when you search for the user, you actually get a physical location and you get a map of where their desk is actually physically located, which is kind of cool. Out of curiosity, have any of you guys, are you aware of that or used floor plans before? Raise your hand. Do the teams raise hand if you have, if you don't mind. Nobody. Interesting. Okay. Oh, somebody did. Jason knows about it. All right. Anybody else? He's it. Okay.
Rob. Me, Schmidt.
Oh, hi. Oh, hi, Rob. I didn't realize you're on. Hi, Rob.
And those vehicles.
Awesome. Great, thank you. So this is one of those things where not many people necessarily know about it, but it's really cool. Although I kept pushing for it and pushing for it because I thought it was really super duper awesome. And then they're like, "Oh, we're going to hoteling, and so it doesn't matter where people sit." But then they changed their mind again, and they're like, "Well, actually." The people in the middle in the open cubes hotel, and then people that have said, I would like to have an office, please, still get an office. So it was just sort of interesting where it's like, okay, so half the people it's relevant for, maybe the other half aren't. So I'm just saying that was the case where I implemented this. So if I don't know how this works post COVID, but that's the thought here. So let's walk through this. I'm gonna lower your hand, Rob. All right.
Yeah,
All
my
right.
arm's getting tired.
It's getting tired, isn't it? Okay. So many windows open. Okay. So this is the employees list. So as you can see, it's got first name, birthday, hire date, termination date. And actually what happens is after the user account is provisioned, this user account is the actual Azure, this is the person field for the Azure Active Directory account. And that way we know that that account has been provisioned. And then we can see what department they're part of. So again, if I go back to my team that I had open, like you say, so many tabs. Okay. So what happens down here is the employee would go, or the HR person would say, all right, this person is ready to go. I'm going to go in here and I'm ready to create the employee record. I actually went through a lot of work in my client to go in and actually say, once that's copied, it would go query every single field from the employee list and let them know if something was not matching up. So in other words, hey, you updated something employee list and didn't in the new hire list, or vice versa. You need to sort of perform the copy again. All right, so I clicked create employee records, and there's Patrick Mahomes. All right, but if you see the user account is blank, that's because our flow has not executed yet. So in real life, I mean, again, in the actual solution I had before, we actually had a timer job that ran. And so what would happen is first it would create the user account, but it took some time for the Active Directory user account to sync to SharePoint. And so I have it running. It's sort of a fall through process. So it has to get so far. And then because of timing, it would sort of time out. So I just said, you know what, I have a bunch of if-then branches. It basically says, all right, if it's made it this far, we're going to continue it. And then it would sort of time out. So let's continue it. So by having it on a timer job that runs like every 1 or 2 hours, I always knew that the whole process might take more than one run through, but it's always going to sort of fall through to the next level. So if we look at our flow that executes here, when an employee is created, this is pretty straightforward. Again, mine had a lot more, if it's been updated, blah, blah, blah. But basically it goes through, it copies values from that Power App right into the, it creates that new item in the employees list. Clearly it's 6 one, half dozen the other, whether you copy it from the Power App or whether the Power App is grabbing information from the employees list. So, but because they're doing it within the Power App, if they have updated the Power App, anyhow, you can, that's sort of a semantic thing, but that's pretty much what that flow is doing. And then finally, we have this employee created or modified. This is where the where all this activity happens. So we created the new employee, and it's basically saying, has the employee been created? We're checking to see if the user has been created yet. Well, what happens is if you do the get user operation and the user doesn't exist yet in Azure Active Directory, it's going to fail. So I have a fail case. You can see it's dotted red that says only execute this if the get failed. So if the get failed, it's going to go and create the user in Azure Active Directory. And this is where it's going to go in, and you're going to go through your giant switch statement of the departments. I've sort of hard-coded. I've only done the IT department. I could add others. But basically, if the user is in the IT department, we're going to go and add them to the IT group. And that is the group ID of that IT group. Once that's happened, we're going to go and update the list item with that user account after the account's been created. And again, if the user account is not available yet, sometimes it takes a minute for that Azure Active Directory to sync up. It's going to fail, but sort of intentionally, and then the next time it runs, it would fall through. So if we look at what happened here, this happened 2 minutes ago, we can go through and we can actually see, okay, it failed, but again, remember, that's because that latency, right? That it tried to create the it went through, it couldn't find the user, so it went and created the user. It dropped Patrick in our IT group, but the item it wasn't fully provisioned yet, so it failed. So what I can do is I can go through and I can resubmit it. And once that account is fetchable by SharePoint, it should be able to populate. But what's going to happen is it won't create the user account again because I have that, get, when it does the get operation for Azure AD, at this time it runs through, it should actually notice that, hey, yes, there we go. So this time it said, all right, it got the user. So it doesn't fall through to the fail. It doesn't create the user. And then it goes ahead and it updates the item in SharePoint. So again, I have this a manual sort of this trigger here, but I have, and you can also do as a timer job. So you have to handle these sort of latency aspects here. So when that happens, you can now see in the underlying list that the user account exists there. And if we go to our users, and I refresh this, there's Patrick. And if we look at the groups that he's a member of, he is now a member of the IT group. So there you go. On top of this, then, now I'm going to go back to my flows again. And I'm going to go to the notify of new employee. So this one I have set up as a manual trigger. So again, you can automate this, but I chose to make it manual. So once everybody's happy that it's sufficiently created, the idea is that somebody could go into the list and here, let me refresh this. Again, in my system, I automated it after the user account was created. But for the demo, I kind of wanted to show you here this manual trigger. You could say notify of new employee. So what's going to happen in this case is, so this is where it's going to populate that Microsoft Word template. It's going to create a new file with the populated values. It's going to send an email and it's going to post the message. So let's look at that in action. So here's the IT channel, IT team, and in here they have the employee management channel. Within here we have a file that's called the checklist template. So if I open this in the app in Word, I don't know if you guys have ever done this before, but you can actually go to the developer tab in Word. You have to make sure that that's available, and you can actually stick in fields. Now, not all of them work with Power Automate so well. Some of them are a little clunky, but you can create a regular checkbox field. But what I did is I actually created a text field. You can go to your document and you can add a rich text control or a plain text control. And then you can give it a name. So when you modify the properties, you can say what are the properties of it. You give the tag a name. So what Power Automate does is when you're looking at that Power Automate script, once you say this is the template I'm using, it actually goes through it and it will detect all your fields. and that way you can populate them. So Power Apps are printable now relatively, but back in the day you couldn't print a Power App at all. So I have had some clients where I've gone through and I will use this action to populate a Word document, and then I will go in and I will use the Save as PDF action, and that way they have like a PDF version of whatever the form was, since again Power Apps might not be so printer friendly. So what happens then is that you basically create the binary of the file, and then you would go back and you would actually say, now perform the create file action and populate it with the contents of the document. So if we go back to our team then, we can see that it took the template and then it created our Patrick Mahomes checklist. So if I go in here, I now see that the name has been populated from the workflow, and that comes from the employees list. Pretty cool, right? Yeah. I think it's cool. So that's part of what happens in that flow. And then if we go to the mail, what then happens is that account went and created a new email. And again, you can set up who you want to notify and which information from the SharePoint list you want to populate here. But you can see it's a simple message that has the employee name and then it's taking their start date. So again, it's grabbing the information from the employees list and populating the email and notifying the correct people. And then the last step is in the employee, we've got a community set up for employee events, and you can see here that we just have a basic message. And again, you could say, please welcome Patrick, who will be starting on this day. You could put whatever you want here, but the idea here is this could be a community where, because it's in Yammer, people can say, congratulations, that's great, things like that. So it provides, my client put it on their intranet homepage, or they had a SharePoint intranet and they put the Yammer feed on the homepage for these birthdays and anniversaries kind of thing. So if somebody, and because it is just free text too, if somebody got married or had a baby or whatever, people could also voluntarily, if they wanted, go post pictures or whatever. And it's just nice that people can actually have a way to provide feedback for that, even if your company doesn't heavily use Yammer. I thought it was a neat way of being able to take advantage of that back and forth process, even if Yammer wasn't itself sort of a destination yet, in the organization. But it's a way you can tie it into that employee process. All right. I think, okay, we're at the end yet. I haven't showed the floor plans yet. So that's the next thing I want to utilize. So if you notice here, we have this sort of strange nomenclature for Office. So Microsoft is trying to incorporate Bing search. If you guys have noticed that already, if you go to Bing and you search and you've tied it to your organization, you'll see your organizational results on your Bing results. And so utilizing this sort of functionality, I wish, it's sort of strange because it's not always part of the Office 365 search experience. I would just say this part is a little kludgy to me, a little bit still. So I've used it. It's not wonderful, but it's getting there. So there's, if you go into your other, if you click on other admin centers and you go to search and intelligence, there is another admin center for, it's part of answers. So you've got insights, answers, data sources, all kinds of things you can do for the search experience, but we're dealing specifically with answers and specifically with floor plans. So let's say that you have a floor plan, and what was a really relief to me is my client was like, I said, you need to have a CAD file. They're like, we don't have a CAD file. I'm like, but your office is just a couple years old. Can't you talk to the designer? They're like, the designer doesn't have a CAD file either. And I was like, oh, bummer. Turns out you can actually open up a Visio document. That's what they had. And you can actually save it as a CAD file, which is really flippin' awesome. So I just used the out-of-the-box Visio. I just went to the templates and used one of these. And I will say that, again, I didn't set up their Visio files. Setting up office floor plans is sort of beyond my pay grade. It's pretty complex. But the key thing to know is when you're dealing with data sources, and you've got all this shape data and everything like that, is the main thing is that you've got data that basically says this office is tied to this office number. So you can see the number up here. So if you look at this, the assumption here is you're on the 17th floor. So that's office 104 on the 17th floor. And that each of these is tied to data. So if we look at the, properties, you can see the name of it, phone number, etc. But this is tied to the shape data, which is basically a data source. All right, so that's our Visio diagram. What you can, you're going to go in here and you're actually going to say a location. So in this case, our office is at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. But you have to take into account that if you're a big enough organization and you have multiple campuses, an office location has to be tied to a building. So the first thing you're going to do is say, what is the building location? And not only have it name, but you probably have some sort of building number. So when you want to add a floor plan, you're going to basically go through and you're going to upload your floor plan, and then you're going to basically, the first step is to say which building from your list of buildings are we creating a floor plan for. After that, you're going to go through and you're going to say, all right, which floor are we looking at? When you go through that, it's basically going to say, right now it couldn't find any users. The reason is all our user accounts are taking a building number into account. So if I look here and I look at the details, you can actually see these are the mapped office locations that it picked up from the Visio diagram. Clearly, it's a little off because it's picking up phone numbers. And so I think, again, if I was better at knowing how to work with Visio office maps, I probably could get that out. But it actually went through the Visio diagram and inferred what the office numbers were. And it picked up all these numbers and it said, I don't find any Active Directory users with user account with office location 17103 or whatever. So I'm going to continue mapping. But now it says, now we're going to link your users with the rooms in the uploaded file, enter the building code. So if we go through here again, you'll actually notice that I found 4 locations because now it knows. So you have to, there's a couple different ways where you can specify, like there's a couple different patterns. You can do dashes or slashes. And so it knows how to detect a certain number of formats that I guess are pretty common for office locations. But basically once it said, oh, I know you're building number 1, okay, now I see that you've got 17101 maps to building 1 for user whatever. Now it's kind of like, oh, now it makes sense to me. So when you go through and then again you have these pattern locations, if you had wings or zones, this is where you're going in and it says, am I catching this right? This is again where you can kind of tweak it. I saw that you had location 1/17124. Is that correct? That is floor 17, room 124? And then when you're all ready, then you basically publish it. Now the first time you do it, it takes a long, like indexing can happen anytime in a 24-hour period. Which is really inconvenient when you're trying to test this stuff. It can be very painful because you're just like all search in Office 365, you're dependent on whenever the heck they feel like doing that. But let's see what this looks like in practice. So if I'm on Office, like just office.com, and I go to the search, let's say I search for my IT manager. You can see it has that office location there. But if I go to, so you saw the it's not on the card yet. I couldn't click on the office location. But if I actually click on the search and it gets the little card thingy back, I can actually click on that office map, or it's the same thing as going to the office tab here. And it actually can show the map, the location. Is that cool? So I think this is especially helpful if you have new employees and they don't know where somebody sits. I believe you could hook this up even for like conference rooms. If you had a conference room, so this is not part of the employee onboarding process, but if people wanted to be able to find a conference room, as long as it has a conference new number and you've set up that user as an asset in Azure Active Directory, I would imagine it would pick it up. So it's kind of cool, right? So I just think this is a neat little bell and whistles, where you can actually incorporate that map. So when you're doing the employee onboarding, the key is just knowing what that formula is supposed to be and making sure that office location is mapped accordingly. But then it just sort of happens, right? Once you set up the floor plan and then you set up people to have the right office ID, it just sort of just goes, right? So again, nice little bell and whistle there for that. So I think that's pretty much it. Boy, 10 minutes to spare. It's more than usual. You guys are kind of a quiet crowd today, but any questions about what I've gone through, what you've seen?